They warned me that an unmated Omega carrying a pup on a college campus was basically painting a target on my back. They weren't wrong, but nobody warned me about the three alphas who would make every single bully wish they had stayed home that semester. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday, not a cinematic, rain-soaked, meaningful Tuesday. A regular, unremarkable Tuesday, the kind where the campus coffee cart runs out of oat milk and someone's bike alarm has been screaming outside the library for 40 minutes, and nobody cares. I was standing in a bathroom stall in the Norland Library at the University of Colorado Boulder, staring at two pink lines on a test I had been avoiding buying for 3 weeks. Somewhere to my left, a guy was having a full-volume phone argument about a missed economics lecture. To my right, someone was eating what smelled like an everything bagel with aggressive enthusiasm. Two pink lines. I looked at them for a long time. Then I said, out loud, to absolutely nobody, "Okay, cool, great, this is fine." It was not fine. My name is Eli Carter. I am 20 years old, a junior studying environmental policy at CU Boulder, and I am, as of this very Tuesday, 6 weeks pregnant with no alpha, no mate bond, no plan, and roughly $47 in my checking account until financial aid drops next week. I am also, though nobody on this campus knows it yet, a psychometrist. Psychometry sounds fancy. It is not fancy. It means that when I touch objects, or people, if the contact is strong enough, I absorb their emotional history. Every residue of feeling that has ever soaked into something, I feel it the moment my skin makes contact. A stranger's coffee cup gives me a flash of their morning anxiety. A textbook in the library gives me the ghost of every frustrated student who has ever slammed it shut. My roommate's jacket, which I accidentally grabbed once instead of my own, gave me a full 30 seconds of his very complicated feelings about his ex-boyfriend back in Denver. It is, in every possible way, a lot. The ability had always been manageable. Background noise, mostly. Something I learned to filter the way you learn to stop hearing the highway outside your bedroom window. But since the pregnancy began, since those 6 weeks of whatever biological chemistry was now quietly rearranging my entire body, my psychometry had shifted, sharpened. What used to be a whisper was now occasionally a shout. I pulled on my gloves, thin black ones I wore everywhere now, telling people it was a sensory thing, which was not entirely a lie, and I shoved the test into the bottom of my backpack. I had a 2 o'clock lecture to get to. Life did not pause for pink lines. The walk across campus from Norland to the Environmental Design Building was exactly 11 minutes if I cut through the quad. I know this because I walk it every Tuesday and Thursday and have timed it obsessively, the way anxious people do. Boulder in October is beautiful in a way that feels almost aggressive. The flatirons rising up against a sky so blue it looks edited. The aspens turning gold along the creek path. The air carrying that specific Rocky Mountain chill that bites the back of your throat. I had my hood up, head down, gloves on. I made it approximately 4 minutes before I heard them. There he is, walking like he owns something. The voice belonged to a guy named Marcus Price, a sophomore alpha who had decided sometime around the 3rd week of fall semester that I was his personal entertainment project. He ran with a small pack of other low-ranking alphas who had appointed themselves the unofficial social police of the environmental studies corridor. The kind of guys who pick targets the way bullies always do, with specific, calculated cruelty designed to look like casual teasing if a professor happened to walk by. I had been his favorite target since the day I corrected him in Professor Adkins' climate policy seminar, and did not apologize for it afterward. There were 3 of them today, Marcus and 2 others, Grant Fielding and a guy everyone just called Turk, whose real name I had never bothered to learn, because learning it felt like giving him more importance than he deserved. They fell into step behind me, close enough that I could feel the displacement of air, the particular low-grade aggression that reads in the body before the brain has time to process it. "Heard you're not doing so hot in Adkins' class anymore," Marcus said, loud enough to carry. "Guess correcting the professor doesn't actually make you smart." "It made me right," I said without turning around, "which in my experience is better." "You don't have a pack," Grant said, like that was the devastating conclusion to an argument nobody had started. "No pack, no alpha, no bond mark. Walking around this campus like you belong here." I stopped. I turned around slowly, the way you do when you want someone to understand that their words have not landed the way they intended. "I do belong here," I said. "I got a scholarship. What did you get?" Marcus's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, and this is the moment I should explain that being an unmated Omega, facing down 3 alphas without a pack sent to back me up is, objectively, a precarious situation. My body knew it. My instincts screamed it. But there is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being afraid over and over again in the same place, and I had crossed into it sometime around week 4 of this semester. At some point, the fear had just become background noise, and what replaced it was something quieter and sharper. Stubbornness, mostly. "Watch yourself," Marcus said, low enough to be a warning. "Always do," I said, and turned back around and kept walking. My hands were shaking inside my gloves. My heart was doing something complicated and loud in my chest. The pup, 6 weeks and the size of nothing, felt somehow heavier than it had 20 minutes ago, as if it already understood what it had been born into. I made it to the building entrance and pushed through the door, and the moment the cold air of the corridor hit me, I exhaled. I did not cry. I had made a personal policy against crying before 3 in the afternoon on weekdays. What I did do was grip the strap of my backpack and let myself feel the residual warmth of whoever had touched it last. My own hands, layered over themselves, dozens of mornings of nervous energy and quiet determination. I was still standing there, steadying myself, when I smelled it. Pine resin and something darker. Cedar, maybe, or wood smoke. 3 distinct threads of alpha scent, woven together in a way that was not aggressive, not territorial, just present. Steady and deep, like the flatirons in autumn. Something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for you to notice it. I looked up. At the far end of the corridor, 3 figures stood outside the graduate research office. I did not know their faces yet. I did not know their names. One of them glanced back, just briefly, and even from 30 feet away, the eye contact landed somewhere in my chest, like a key turning in a lock I had not known was there. My psychometry, unbidden and uninvited, pulsed once through my palms. The emotion that came back was not aggression. It was not dominance or hunger or any of the things I had been conditioned to expect from an alpha's instinctive attention. It was recognition. Like they had been looking for something for a very long time and had just, in the span of a single hallway glance, found it. I yanked my attention away, tucked my chin down, and walked to my lecture. 2 pink lines, 3 alpha strangers, $47 in my account. Tuesday was really showing out today. Professor Adkins' 2 o'clock climate policy lecture was held in a tiered classroom that smelled permanently of dry erase markers and academic anxiety. I slid into my usual seat, 3rd row, left side, close enough to engage without being the guy who sits in the front row and reminds the professor about the homework. I had my notebook open and my pencil ready before most people had even unzipped their bags, because the one thing pregnancy had done so far, aside from turning my relationship with coffee into a complicated grief process, was make me absolutely incapable of sitting still without something in my hands. The lecture started. I took notes. I asked one question that made Marcus, sitting 4 rows back, audibly exhale through his nose like I had personally offended him by having functional brain cells. I considered that a small victory and moved on. It was 40 minutes into the lecture when the door at the back of the room opened. Late arrivals were not unusual. Boulder students operated on their own private time zone, shaped by altitude, optimism, and the quiet delusion that parking on campus was ever going to work out. I did not look up. I was mid-sentence in my notes, tracking Professor Adkins' point about federal land use policy, and I had a system. Then the scent hit me. Pine resin, cedar, wood smoke. 3 threads, exactly as before, except now they were in an enclosed room. And enclosed rooms do not forgive scent the way open corridors do. It moved through the air like something with intent, curling past the dry erase markers and the stale coffee smell and the faint anxiety sweat of 26 undergraduates, and it landed on the back of my neck like a warm hand. My pencil stopped moving. Every reasonable instinct I had told me not to turn around. Turning around was how you made things complicated. Turning around was how you acknowledged that a scent had found you specifically out of 26 people and done something to your nervous system that you were not prepared to explain. I turned around. There were 3 of them settling into the back row, and up close, or close enough because the back row was not exactly intimate, they were a problem. The first one was tall, even sitting down, with broad shoulders and dark hair that looked like it had been pushed back with his hand approximately 12 times that morning. His jaw was set, and his eyes were scanning the lecture slides with the focused, slightly impatient expression of someone used to absorbing information fast. His scent was the pine, sharp and clean. The second one was leaning back in his chair with the specific, loose-limbed ease of a person who had never once been nervous in a classroom setting. Sandy brown hair, a jaw that could have been sculpted, and the kind of mouth that looked like it defaulted to almost smiling even when he was being completely still. His scent was the cedar, warmer and slower. The third one was looking directly at me. He had green eyes, not metaphorically interesting green, not hazel passing as green. Actual, functional, distracting green, the color of the flat irons in late summer when the light hit a specific way. His hair was dark auburn, slightly longer than the others, and he had the kind of cheekbones that made you momentarily forget what you were upset about. His scent was the wood smoke, the deepest of the 3, the one that had hit my psychometry in the hallway and sent recognition pulsing through my palms. He did not look away. I did, immediately. With the energy of someone who had absolutely not just made prolonged eye contact with a stranger across a lecture hall. I faced forward. I picked up my pencil. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page, even though the date was already on the previous page. Professor Adkins said something about the Colorado River Compact, and I wrote it down with the handwriting of someone whose pulse was doing something medically interesting. For the next 20 minutes, I was a model student, present, focused, absolutely not aware of the specific angle at which wood smoke and green eyes was sitting relative to my position in the room, which I was not tracking at all, not even a little. Then my psychometry did something it had never done before. I was not touching anything that belonged to them. My gloves were on. There was no physical contact, no object exchange, no proximity that should have been close enough to trigger a reading. But something moved through the room anyway, slow and deliberate, like a current finding the path of least resistance, and it passed through the thin barrier of my gloves like they were not there. What I felt was not a memory. It was not an emotional residue baked into an object by years of handling. It was immediate, present. 3 distinct emotional signatures, and they were all pointing at the same source. Me. The dark-haired one with the pine scent felt like urgency barely held in check, a tension coiled so tight it had become indistinguishable from his resting state. Underneath it was something softer that he was working very hard to keep below the surface. The cedar one felt like careful patience, deliberate and practiced, the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from discipline. The wood smoke one felt like recognition, and underneath the recognition, something I had no clean word for except longing. the particular ache of someone who had been looking at a door for a long time and had just watched it open. I exhaled very quietly. This was new. My psychometry did not do this. It had never reached across a room uninvited and handed me a stranger's emotional interior like a gift I had not asked for. Pregnancy, apparently, was upgrading me in ways that were going to require significant personal adjustment. The lecture ended. I stayed in my seat longer than necessary, reorganizing my notes with unnecessary thoroughness because I needed the room to partially clear before I stood up. Basic self-preservation. It did not work. You're in the wrong section. I looked up, green eyes, up close, worse. He was standing at the end of my row, backpack slung over one shoulder, expression carefully neutral in the way that meant the thing underneath it was not neutral at all. The wood smoke scent was significantly stronger at this distance, and my gloves, thin as they were, felt suddenly inadequate. "Excuse me?" I said. "This section," he said, and his voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not need volume to carry. "It's listed as an upper division elective. Graduate students don't usually sit in on it." I looked at him for a moment. "I'm not a graduate student," I said. "I'm a junior, and I've been in this section since September, so if there's been a mix-up, it predates me significantly." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. The almost smile that matched his friend's default expression, except on his face it looked like it surprised him. "Eli Carter," he said, not a question. My stomach did something that was not nausea and was not the pup, and was therefore a category of sensation I was choosing not to examine right now. "You know my name," I said. "I read the class roster," he said. "We just transferred into this section." "All three of you," I said, because his two companions had drifted into my peripheral vision, flanking him with the unhurried confidence of people who did not need to rush toward anything. "All three of us," he confirmed. I stood up, pulled my backpack onto my shoulder, and looked at him with a specific expression I reserved for situations where I needed to appear completely unaffected by something that was affecting me enormously. "Great," I said. "The more the merrier. Welcome to climate policy." I stepped past him toward the aisle. Our arms did not touch. There were at least 4 inches of air between us as I passed. My psychometry lit up like every nerve ending in my palms had been plugged into a current. The longing hit me so hard, I almost stopped walking. I did not stop walking. I kept my face forward and my chin up, and I made it to the hallway and then the building exit, and the cold October air of Boulder hit my face like a correction. Behind me, still in the building, 3 alpha scents were doing something to the air that had nothing to do with instinct, and everything to do with the fact that whatever had just passed between us in that classroom was not finished. It had not even started. I told myself that approximately 6 times on the walk back across the quad, which is 5 times more than a mentally stable person should need to repeat a single thought, and that number alone was evidence that something had gone sideways in my afternoon. The Flatirons were doing their usual October thing, catching the late light and throwing it back in gold and amber, and normally that view resets something in me. Boulder had a way of making the sky feel like a personal apology for everything difficult happening beneath it. Today, it was just sky. Nice sky. Completely ineffective sky. I had 3 problems. Problem 1 was the pregnancy, which was still happening regardless of my feelings about it. Problem 2 was Marcus Price and his rotating cast of minor antagonists, who had apparently decided that this semester was the one where they made my campus experience a recurring inconvenience. Problem 3 was a set of green eyes and 2 supporting alpha presences who had just transferred into my Tuesday-Thursday lecture, and whose combined scent had done something to my nervous system that I was going to need at least 72 hours and possibly a licensed professional to fully process. I was ranking these problems in order of urgency when my phone buzzed. My roommate, Jasper Wells, had texted, You look like you're arguing with the sky again. Come to the union. I bought chips. Jasper was a beta, a junior in the architecture program, and the only person on this campus who knew about my psychometry. He did not know about the pregnancy yet. I had been working up to that conversation with the same energy I applied to every difficult thing, which was to say I had been putting it off and hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself through willpower alone. It had not. I redirected toward the student union. The Alfred Packer Grill on the ground floor was its usual late afternoon chaos, the kind of noise that was somehow both too much and exactly right. Dozens of conversations layering over each other into a sound that felt almost like silence after the lecture hall. Jasper was at a corner table with an enormous bag of tortilla chips and the expression of someone who had been people-watching for the last 20 minutes and had opinions. "You have the face," he said when I dropped into the chair across from him. "What face?" "The face where something happened and you're deciding whether to tell me about it or just internally combust." I pulled the chip bag toward me. "I corrected Marcus Price in seminar again." "That's not the face." I ate a chip. "I found out I'm pregnant this morning." Jasper went very still. He had this quality, a beta stillness that was different from alpha stillness, less charged and more careful, the kind that meant he was taking something seriously rather than strategically. "Eli," he said. 6 weeks, I said. "I've known something was off for a while. I just kept not buying the test because buying the test made it a thing, and I was enjoying the part where it wasn't a thing yet." "Who is the alpha?" "Not relevant," I said, which was the cleanest way to say it was complicated and painful, and I was not ready to open that door in a student union with tortilla chips as emotional support. "He's not in the picture. He won't be." Jasper looked at me for a long moment. "Okay," he said, which was one of the many reasons Jasper Wells was the correct person to have as a roommate. He did not push. He filed it and stayed present. "What do you need?" "I need to figure out my options and make a plan, and probably eat all of these chips," I said, in that order. "Done," he said, and pushed the bag fully to my side of the table. We sat with that for a minute, the comfortable kind of silence that only exists between people who have known each other long enough to not need to fill every space. Then Jasper said, still carefully, "You also have another face underneath the pregnancy face." "I have one face," I said. "You have approximately 9 faces and I've cataloged them all," he said. "The second one is the face where your psychometry did something weird." I ate another chip. 3 alphas transferred into my climate policy section today. Jasper raised his eyebrows. And my psychometry reached across a room without physical contact and handed me their emotional signatures like it had somewhere to be. He blinked. "That's new." "The pregnancy is apparently upgrading my abilities in ways nobody warned me about," I said, which feels like relevant information that the universe could have led with. "What did you feel from them?" I thought about the longing, the urgency, the patient, careful stillness that felt like discipline rather than peace. "Nothing useful," I said, which was technically true from a practical standpoint. Jasper looked at me with the expression that meant he knew I was editing and was choosing to accept the edited version for now. We had been sitting there for approximately 10 minutes more, Jasper describing an architecture critique that had apparently devolved into a philosophical argument about whether parking structures could be art, when the union door opened and the scent arrived before the people did. Pine, cedar, wood smoke. I did not turn around. I had a strict policy, newly instated approximately 2 hours ago, about not turning around when those particular scents entered a room. Jasper's eyes moved to something over my shoulder, and then back to me with an expression that said everything without saying anything. "Don't," I said quietly. "I didn't say a word," he said. "Your eyebrows said a word." "My eyebrows are neutral." "Your eyebrows have never been neutral in your entire life, Jasper." The scents were getting closer. I focused on the chip in my hand with extraordinary intensity. Mind if we sit here? I looked up. Cedar, the sandy-haired one, the almost smiling one, was standing at the end of our table with a tray and the specific ease of someone who had decided to be comfortable, regardless of the circumstances, and simply committed to it. Behind him were the other two, Pine and Woodsmoke, and Woodsmoke had the green eyes and that same carefully neutral expression that I was beginning to understand was just his face when he was paying close attention to something. The union was not even close to full. There were at least 12 other tables with open seats. There are 12 other tables, I said pleasantly. There are, Cedar agreed, with the almost smile fully engaged now. But this one has better lighting. The lighting is identical throughout this entire floor. I'm sensitive to subtleties, he said, and pulled out a chair and sat down as if the conversation had concluded in his favor. The other two sat. Jasper made a small sound that I identified as suppressed delight and that I would be addressing with him later. I'm Sawyer, Cedar said, extending a hand across the table toward Jasper with the comfort of someone who introduced himself to strangers approximately 40 times a day and enjoyed it every time. Jasper, my trader roommate said, shaking it immediately. Reed, said Pine, nodding once, the particular nod of someone who considered the nod to be a sufficient and complete social interaction. The green-eyed one looked at me. Calder, he said. His voice landed the same way his scent did, low and present, the kind of sound that did not ask for anything and somehow got your full attention anyway. Good for you, I said. Sawyer made a sound that was definitely a laugh, caught and redirected into clearing his throat. Reed glanced at Calder. Calder's almost not a smile moved one fraction closer to an actual smile. You're not going to tell us your name, he said. You already know my name, I said. You read the class roster, and you picked a seat 4 rows behind me, and you followed me to the student union, which is either very dedicated academic networking or something I should be concerned about. The table went quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet, the kind where something true has been said, and everyone present is deciding how to hold it. Calder leaned forward slightly, not crowding, just closing the distance between careful and honest by a single deliberate inch. We weren't following you, he said. We come here every Tuesday. My psychometry pulsed. He was telling the truth. That was somehow worse, because it meant this was not calculated. It meant 3 alpha strangers had transferred into my section and sat in the back row and showed up at the same student union table on the same Tuesday afternoon, not because they were pursuing me, but because whatever was pulling us toward the same coordinates had nothing to do with choice and everything to do with something older and more inconvenient, which was somehow both a relief and its own specific problem, because Sawyer at close range, without Reed's intensity or Calder's green eyes to distribute my attention across, was a concentrated experience. His cedar scent was warmer out here in the cold air, the kind of warm that made your shoulders want to drop without your authorization. Hey, he said slightly breathless, which told me he had actually jogged. An alpha who jogged to catch an omega who had just told him to enjoy the lighting was either very committed to something or deeply unaware of social cues, and Sawyer did not read as unaware. I said what I needed to say back there, I told him. I know, he said. I just wanted to make sure you got back okay. I stared at him. I'm walking across a college campus in daylight. Marcus Price is a third-year alpha who has been making your semester difficult since September, Sawyer said, and the almost smile was gone, replaced by something quieter and more serious. We've noticed. The air between us shifted. I recalibrated the entire interaction in approximately 2 seconds. They had not transferred into my section today. They had noticed me before today. They had transferred in because of what they had already seen. How long have you been noticing? I said, and I want the record to show that my voice was completely even. Sawyer had the grace to look mildly uncomfortable. A few weeks. A few weeks, I repeated. We didn't want to approach without context, he said. Reed's particular about that. And what context did you finally get that made today the day? He looked at me steadily. This morning, outside the environmental design building, after Marcus and his friends cornered you on the quad path. My jaw tightened. They had seen that. They had watched Marcus get close enough to lower his voice at me, watch the specific geometry of 3 alphas boxing in one unmated omega, and they had processed it as information rather than immediate intervention. Part of me wanted to be annoyed about that. Another part, smaller and more honest, understood it. Walking into packed business uninvited was its own kind of violation. I handled it, I said. You did, Sawyer agreed, without any of the surprise that would have made it condescending. That's not why we're here. Then why are you here? He looked at me for a moment, and what I caught through my gloves was not from him, not directly, but from the strap of his bag where his hand was gripping it. Layered feeling, recent and vivid. The specific emotional texture of a group decision made carefully, the kind where everyone agrees, but one person carries the weight of being the one to say it out loud. Sawyer was the one they sent because Sawyer was the one who could say hard things in a way that did not feel like a threat. We're not trying to crowd you, he said. We know you don't know us. We know today was a lot of information arriving without invitation. He paused. But something is happening between you and us that none of us chose. And we think you felt it too. And we'd rather be honest about that than pretend we haven't noticed. I could have deflected. I was genuinely gifted at deflection. I had spent most of the last 3 acts doing it with considerable skill. What came out instead was, I'm dealing with something right now that has nothing to do with you. It was not a lie. It was not the whole truth, but it was the truest thing I could offer without opening a door I was not ready to open on a public university steps while wearing emotional armor that was already showing significant structural damage. Sawyer nodded once. Okay, he said, the same word Jasper had used, and with the same clean respect. No pushing, no bargaining, no alpha instinct crowding the space between us. Just acceptance. Then he said, our numbers in the class group me, in case you need anything, any reason at all. He turned and went back inside. I stood there for a second, then my phone buzzed. Campus Emergency Alert System, which I had learned in my first week to take seriously because Colorado weather was not a metaphor. It read, Severe weather warning, University of Colorado Boulder. Wind advisory and flash flood watch in effect 4:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. All outdoor campus activities suspended. Shelter in place where possible. I looked up. The blue sky had done something while I was not watching it. The western horizon now pressing dark and greenish in the way that Rocky Mountain storms developed, fast and without apology. The Flatirons had disappeared behind a wall of cloud that was moving toward campus with the energy of something that had made a decision and was not reconsidering it. My evening lab was in the geology building on the far east side of campus, 23 minutes from here on foot, and the sky had approximately 15 minutes of patience left in it. I had 2 choices, start walking fast and gamble, or shelter somewhere closer and wait it out. The wind picked up, cold and sharp, carrying the first edge of rain in it. My body made the decision before my brain finished the math. I turned and went back inside the Union. The problem with that decision became immediately apparent because inside the Union, the overhead screens were cycling through the emergency alert, and half the student population had apparently received the same information at the same time and arrived at the same solution, because the space had filled significantly in the 2 minutes I had been outside. The noise level was considerable. The available seating was not. Sawyer, Reed, and Calder were still at the corner table. Jasper had, with either perfect timing or deliberate betrayal, already left. I stood in the entryway and did a full scan of the room. No open tables. No empty sections of floor that weren't already being claimed by students setting up camp with laptops and snack runs. The window seats were full. The stairwell seating was full. The one open chair in the entire ground floor of the Alfred Packer Grill was the chair I had vacated approximately 6 minutes ago. Calder was looking at me, not with satisfaction or calculation, with the same careful, neutral attention that I was beginning to understand was just how he looked at things he was trying not to get wrong. I walked back to the table. I sat down. Nobody said anything for a moment, which was the correct instinct, and I respected it. Then Sawyer, sliding a fresh cup of something hot across the table toward me without making eye contact, said simply, "They have chamomile." I looked at the cup. I looked at him. "How did you know I wanted chamomile?" "You were holding your stomach when you walked back in," he said, neutral and factual. Not obvious, but I noticed. My psychometry throbbed in both palms. His intention behind that observation was not strategic. It was not a power move or a mating instinct calculation. It was just care, clean and uncomplicated, the emotional residue of a person who noticed small things about people because he was built that way. I picked up the cup. "Thank you," I said, which was 2 words more than I had planned on offering, but the chamomile was warm and my hands had been cold since the union steps, and some truths are just logistics. Reed glanced at me once, brief and assessing. His pine scent was grounded in the enclosed space, something steadying underneath the sharpness of it. He did not attempt conversation, which I noted as a point in his favor. Calder was reading something on his phone, or performing the act of reading something on his phone, because his attention had the particular quality of something pointed sideways rather than straight ahead. Outside, the first real wave of rain hit the windows. It came fast and sideways, the way Boulder storms did, with the immediate conviction of a season making a point. The lights in the union flickered once, twice, and then held. Nobody at the table moved. The storm settled into its rhythm. The room's noise shifted from student chaos into something lower and more contained. The particular atmosphere of people waiting something out together. The way weather does that to people, strips the urgency from whatever they were rushing toward and replaces it with the simple fact of now. I drank my chamomile. The warmth of it moved through me slowly, reaching something tired underneath the adrenaline and the pink lines and the psychometry overload and the sheer accumulated weight of a Tuesday that had started in a library bathroom stall and arrived here. I was not okay. I was not fine. But I was warm, and the rain was outside, and for the first time since this morning, nobody was demanding anything from me. Calder shifted slightly in his seat, and his forearm came to rest on the table, close but not touching, and the wood smoke of him moved through the air between us like it was making itself known rather than pushing. I did not move away. We sat in the rain sound and the warmth and the careful distance of 2 people waiting for the other to move first, and neither of us moved. And somehow that stillness said more than any of the words we had and had not exchanged today. Outside, the storm showed no sign of finishing with us yet. Inside, something fragile and unnamed was deciding whether it was brave enough to exist. The storm had been going for about 20 minutes when it happened. Not dramatically, not with any of the cinematic warning signs that would have given me time to prepare. It happened the way most things that change everything do, quietly and without permission, in the middle of an ordinary moment. My body decided it was done holding it together. It started with the nausea, which had been politely absent all day and had apparently been saving itself for maximum inconvenience. It moved through me in a slow, climbing wave, the kind that does not ask whether now is a good time, and I set down my chamomile cup with more care than the situation probably required, and pressed the back of my gloved hand against my mouth, and breathed through my nose and stared at a fixed point on the table. The fixed point happened to be Calder's forearm. His sleeve was pushed up slightly, just below the elbow, and there was a small scar there, pale and old, shaped like nothing in particular. I focused on it the way you focus on a horizon point when you are trying not to be sick on a boat. It helped. Slightly. Enough. Eli, Calder's voice, low and careful. Not alarmed. The tone of someone who had noticed something and was choosing to name it without making it larger than it needed to be. I'm fine, I said into the back of my hand. You don't look fine, Reed said from across the table, and his voice was direct in the way that could have been harsh and somehow was not. The way a clinical fact delivered without judgment is different from a criticism. Thank you, Reed, I said. That's really helpful. I wasn't trying to be helpful, he said. I was being accurate. Sawyer made a small motion with his hand that I interpreted as the gesture of someone who had spent significant time with Reed and had developed a whole system for nonverbal communication about his delivery. The nausea crested and leveled the way it did, rolling back without breaking, and I exhaled slowly and dropped my hand. I need some air, I said, and then the universe, which had clearly decided that Tuesday was the day for irony, presented me with the full panoramic view of the storm, still hammering every window in the building. I laughed. It came out smaller than a real laugh, more like the sound a person makes when the situation is absurd enough that laughing is the only honest response. Okay, I said. No air. Water, Sawyer said, already standing. I'll get water. You don't have to do that. I'm already up. He went. I sat with Reed and Calder and the ambient noise of a shelter-in-place student population, and I took stock of myself with the particular honesty that nausea enforces. I was 20 years old, 6 weeks pregnant, sitting at a table with 3 alpha strangers I had met 4 hours ago, in a storm I could not leave, in a city where the one person who knew my situation had apparently gone home. My phone buzzed. Jasper. Sorry, got caught in the architecture building. You okay? Me. Define okay. Jasper. That's not a no, so I'll take it. I put my phone face down. You don't have to explain anything, Calder said quietly, not looking at me. He was looking at the rain on the window. We're not asking. I know, I said. But if something is wrong, he continued, same quiet register, and you needed someone, we would want to know. The directness of it caught me off guard. Not the offer itself, but the simplicity of it. No performance, no alpha posturing about protection or duty, just a straightforward statement of availability, the way you would tell someone where the emergency exit was. Here is the door if you need it. I looked at him. He was still watching the rain. My psychometry was doing the thing it had been doing all afternoon, pulsing softly without physical trigger, reading the room with a sensitivity that pregnancy had apparently decided to gift me without a warranty or instruction manual. What I got from Calder right now was not complex. It was patience. Not the performed kind, not the calculated kind, the real kind, that comes from someone who has waited a long time for something important and learned not to hold their breath while doing it. Sawyer came back with a water bottle and set it in front of me without ceremony. I opened it and drank. The alpha who left, I said, and I do not know exactly why I said it, except that the storm had made the room smaller and the chamomile had made me warmer, and I had been carrying this particular weight since before a library bathroom stall on a Tuesday morning, and something in me had decided, without consulting the rest of me, that I was tired. All 3 of them went still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of people who are giving something their full attention and have the discipline not to crowd it. His name was Daniel Ashworth, I said. We were together for 8 months. He was a graduate student, environmental law. Smart, focused, the kind of person who made you feel like you were the most important thing in the room when he looked at you. I turned the water bottle in my hands. He was also mated, already bonded to someone back in Seattle. He did not tell me this for 7 of the 8 months we were together. The rain hit the windows in a long, driving sheet. I found out the way you find out things you were not supposed to know, I said. My psychometry. I touched his laptop once, just to move it off the chair so I could sit down, and I got the whole thing. The bond scent embedded in the casing, the emotional residue of a relationship that was not me, the particular guilt of someone who had been performing a version of himself for months. I paused. It lasted about 4 seconds. It felt like longer. Reed had set down whatever he had been holding. He was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read, but that did not contain pity, which I appreciated more than I could have articulated. I ended it the same day, I said. He tried to explain, which mostly meant he tried to make the explanation into something I had done wrong by finding out. He said I had no right to read his things, as though the problem was my ability and not the 8 months of lies preceding it. I looked at the water bottle. I found out 3 weeks ago that I was late. I kept telling myself it was stress. Then I kept telling myself it would resolve. Then I bought the test this morning and stopped telling myself things. The table held the information for a moment. Then Sawyer said, carefully, "He doesn't know." "No," I said, "and he is not going to. He made his choices and they are not my problem anymore, and the child is not going to be handed to someone who lied for 7 months because biology says he has a claim." My voice came out steadier than I expected. That part I am clear on. "Good," Reed said. Just that. One word, flat and certain, with all the weight of a man who had assessed a situation, reached a conclusion, and had nothing further to add because the conclusion was complete. Something in my chest loosened by a fraction. "I haven't told anyone except Jasper," I said. "I don't know why I'm telling you." Calder turned from the window then and looked at me directly for the first time since I had sat back down. And the green of his eyes in the storm gray light was something I was going to have to deal with at a later time. "Because you're tired," he said, "and you're carrying it alone. And you've been doing that long enough that your body is starting to put it down whether you decide to or not." I opened my mouth, closed it. He was not wrong. That was the problem. He had said the exact true thing with the same simple directness he had used for everything else, and it had landed somewhere underneath my ribs and was currently making my eyes do something I was going to firmly redirect. I looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I'm not looking for rescuing," I said to the ceiling. "I want to be clear about that. I am not a situation to be managed, or a problem that requires a pack solution, or anything that involves someone else making decisions about my life." "Nobody said you were," Sawyer said. "I'm saying it preemptively," I said, "because I have met alphas before, and preemptive clarity saves everyone time." "That's fair," Sawyer said, with something in his voice that sounded genuine. "It is," I agreed and looked back down. Then my psychometry did the thing I had been half expecting and half dreading since I opened my mouth and said Daniel Ashworth's name out loud. It reached, the way it had in the lecture hall, that new pregnancy-sharpened reach that did not require touch, and it pulled back something from all three of them at once. From Sawyer, warm and clean, protective anger on my behalf, the kind that had no interest in acting on itself, but existed because someone who deserved better had not gotten it. From Reed, quiet and certain, respect, not the surface kind, the deep kind, the kind that recalibrates. From Calder, closest to me, his wood smoke warmth pressing gently against the edge of my awareness. Something that cracked along one edge, a fracture in the patience I had been reading all afternoon. Not breaking, just moved. The emotional equivalent of someone who had been holding very still and had just quietly and privately exhaled. I did not tell them any of that, but I stopped gripping the water bottle quite so hard. Outside, the storm was already beginning to soften at its edges, the way Colorado storms did, arriving with complete conviction and leaving without announcement. The rain was still steady, but the sideways ferocity of the first hour had gentled into something more like a sustained conversation than an argument. I had told 3 strangers the most private thing in my life inside a student union during a weather emergency, and none of them had tried to fix me, manage me, or make it about themselves. I sat with that for a moment and let it mean what it meant. The pup, I said quietly, almost to myself. I keep calling it the pup in my head. Like if I use the word, it becomes more real than 2 pink lines on a test. It's already real, Reed said without inflection, and it should have been blunt and was instead oddly gentle. Calling it something just means you're catching up. I looked at him. He met the look without any self-consciousness, the particular steadiness of someone who said true things and did not apologize for the shape they made. Catching up, I repeated. You're going to be fine, he said, not because it's going to be easy, because you're the kind of person who handles hard things without losing themselves in the process. The confidence in his voice was not performed. My psychometry confirmed it before I could second-guess it. He believed that entirely. I looked down at my gloved hands and felt, for the first time since a library bathroom and 2 pink lines, something that was not fear holding the center of my chest. It was not hope exactly. Not yet. It was the thing that comes just before hope, the small, stubborn possibility that maybe carrying something hard alone was a choice rather than a condition. The storm outside dropped another register toward quiet. At the table, nobody moved to leave. The storm had softened to a steady, quiet persistence outside the windows. The kind of rain that had stopped trying to make a point and was just existing now, gray and continuous and oddly peaceful. The union had settled into its shelter-in-place rhythm, students scattered across tables with laptops and earbuds, and the particular suspended energy of people whose plans had been temporarily canceled by weather. Our table existed in its own separate atmosphere. I was aware of this in a way that felt new, not the hypervigilance I had been operating on since September, the constant low-level monitoring of who was nearby and what their intent might be, and whether I needed to calculate an exit. This was different. This was the specific, unfamiliar sensation of not being the only person in a room who was paying attention to me, and having that feel like relief rather than threat. I was trying to figure out what to do with that when Sawyer said, without any preamble, "I grew up in a pack that didn't want me." I looked at him. He was turning his coffee cup slowly between his palms, watching it rotate, and the almost smile was completely absent. What was underneath it was something older and more considered. "My mother's pack," he said. "Denver, 3rd generation, very traditional, very hierarchical. My mother was an Omega. My father was an Alpha from outside the territory who she bonded with against pack preference." He shrugged, the kind of shrug that has weight behind it. They allowed the bond because they had to. They never allowed much else. I grew up watching my father be tolerated in spaces where he should have been welcomed. Watching my mother navigate a pack that loved her conditionally. He set down the cup. "I'm telling you that because you said you weren't looking for rescuing. And I want you to understand that when we noticed what Marcus was doing, it wasn't about rescuing. It was about the fact that all 3 of us know specifically what it looks like when a pack structure is being used to make someone feel like they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be." The table was quiet. My psychometry was not delivering anything sharp or sudden, just the steady, warm confirmation of a person telling a true thing because it was the right moment for it, not because it served a strategy. "That's a lot to share with someone you met 4 hours ago," I said. "You shared more," he said simply. He was not wrong. Reed shifted in his seat, and I had learned enough about his particular economy of movement in the last 2 hours to understand that a shift meant he was about to say something he had been holding for a while. "My pack history is not something I discuss," he said matter of fact. "But I'll tell you that I understand carrying something that other people decided was your problem to manage alone. And I think that's enough common ground for now." It was, I thought, an extraordinary amount of vulnerability disguised as a practical statement. Reed delivered emotional truth the way some people delivered weather reports. Direct, accurate, and completely without drama. I looked at Calder. He was already looking at me. He had been, I suspected, for most of the last 10 minutes, in that sideways way he had where the attention was full, but the angle was careful. "You want to know mine?" he said. "I wasn't going to ask," I said. "You were," he said. Not challenging, just accurate, the same register Reed used for true things. "Maybe," I admitted. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain moved against the window in a slow sheet, and the light in the Union had shifted into the particular quality of late afternoon caught inside a storm. Everything softened and amber and slightly unreal. "My younger brother presented as an Omega," Calder said. "In our pack territory in New Hampshire, that carries a specific weight. Our father was a dominant alpha with very clear ideas about designation hierarchy." He paused. "My brother had my father's temper, my mother's stubbornness, and absolutely no intention of being managed by either of them. When he was 17, the pack elders tried to arrange a bonding contract. Traditional, economically beneficial, completely against his will." He looked at his hands. "I was 20. I was already at college. I found out 2 weeks after it happened." His voice remained even, but my psychometry caught the edge underneath it. A fracture of old guilt that had healed imperfectly, the way broken bones sometimes do. I got home as fast as I could. The contract had already been signed. My brother had already left. He packed what he could carry and walked out of the territory alone rather than comply. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Safe," Calder said. "Happy. Portland. He calls me every Sunday." The ghost of something moved across his face. "But I wasn't there when it happened. I was at school, and I was building something for my future. And my brother was alone in a room with pack elders and a bonding contract, and I did not know." The guilt in that last sentence was clean and precise and completely self-directed. Not performed, not angled towards sympathy, just the honest accounting of someone who had sat with a failure long enough to know its exact dimensions. "That's not your fault," I said. "No," he agreed, "it's not, but it is mine to carry, the knowledge that I wasn't there. And it is part of the reason that when I see someone being made to feel unwelcome in a place they belong, I don't look away." The three of them sat there, and the rain sat outside, and I sat with what had just happened across this table. Three alphas who had held territory and hierarchy and pack legacy and had each, in their own way, arrived at the same private conclusion, that none of those things were worth as much as doing what was right for the person in front of you. I picked up my chamomile cup, which had gone cold, and held it anyway because my hands needed something to do. "I have a terrible habit," I said, "of not letting people help me. My therapist back home called it hyper-independence. I called it having a realistic understanding of what happens when you trust people with weight they haven't earned." "That sounds exhausting," Sawyer said. "It is deeply exhausting," I confirmed. "I do not recommend it." Sawyer smiled. The real version of it, not the almost smile, and it rearranged his face into something that I was going to add to my list of things to address at a later time. A list that was getting quite long at this point. "What's the pup's name going to be?" he asked. The question landed softly, no agenda behind it, just genuine curiosity, and it did something unexpected to me. Nobody had asked me that yet, not even Jasper. The world had been full of logistics and decisions and the clinical vocabulary of options and appointments, and I had been so focused on the architecture of the problem that I had not once let myself stand in the part of it that was not a problem at all. "I don't know yet," I said, and heard something different in my own voice, something that was not fear. I keep trying to think about it, and my brain redirects to the practical stuff, the financial aid, the housing, the semester schedule. "Those things are real," Reed said. "They also don't cancel the other part." "The other part," I repeated. The part where you're going to be someone's parent, he said, and that's not a problem to solve. It just is. I looked at him for a long moment. My psychometry gave me nothing complicated from Reed right now. What it gave me was something almost architectural, the emotional equivalent of a load-bearing wall. Solid, structural, entirely without ornament. The thing about Reed, I was beginning to understand, was that he was not warm the way Sawyer was warm, but he was steady in a way that made warmth feel like a bonus rather than a requirement. Okay, I said, and felt the words settle differently than it usually did. Not the deflecting okay I used to close conversations, the kind that meant I heard you and I am letting it matter. Calder's forearm was still on the table. It had been there for the better part of an hour, close but not crossing the distance I had not yet given him permission to cross. I was aware of it the way you are aware of a door that is slightly open. Not open enough to walk through, but open enough that the air moves differently. I pulled off my right glove, not dramatically. I did it the way you do something that has already been decided before you consciously decide it. I set the glove on the table beside my cup. The air on my bare hand was cool, and the sensation of the table surface under my fingers was immediate. The layered history of 100 students pressing into the laminate over years. Low level and soft, nothing sharp. And then Calder's hand moved. Slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone who understood the significance of what was happening. He turned his palm upward on the table, a few inches from mine, not reaching, not taking, just offering the choice. I looked at his open hand. My psychometry was very quiet, the way a room goes quiet before something important. I placed my hand in his. The contact was gentle, and the reading was immediate, and nothing about it was what I expected. No strategy, no hierarchy calculation, no territorial instinct assessing an unmated omega as an acquisition. What I felt from Calder was recognition so deep it had roots. The emotional residue of someone who had been carrying a specific, unnamed awareness for weeks, something that had not yet had a word, but had been present in every glance across a campus, in a class transfer, in a corner table at a student union, in a palm turned upward in the rainlight of an October afternoon. It said, "There you are." Not possessively, not with urgency or demand, with the quiet, enormous relief of someone who had been looking at a locked door for a very long time and had just, without fanfare, been handed the key. My throat tightened. I did not cry. My policy was intact, but I held on. Sawyer and Reed were present and still, and entirely non-intrusive, the way people are when they understand that something significant is happening beside them, and the most respectful thing they can offer is their quiet. Outside, the rain had gentled further. The windows showed a campus beginning to emerge from the storm, students reappearing on paths, the flatirons still hidden behind low cloud, but the light beneath them shifting towards something that was almost evening. "I don't know what this is," I said, to Calder's hand in mine, or maybe to the room, or maybe just to myself. "Neither do we," Calder said. "Not yet." That's a very unsatisfying answer. "It's an honest one," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." The warmth of his hand was real and present, and the wood smoke of him was close enough now that it was no longer just atmospheric. It was specific. It was his. My body recognized it with a certainty that bypassed everything rational and landed somewhere biological and ancient and completely inconvenient. And underneath all of that, underneath the recognition and the warmth and the thing that had no name yet, was something small and quiet and stubborn. The pup, 6 weeks and the size of nothing, who was apparently going to be born into a world significantly stranger and more complicated than I had planned for on a Tuesday morning in a library bathroom. I wrapped my fingers more firmly around Calder's hand. The storm finished. Outside, the first thin line of clear sky appeared above the flatirons, pale gold and unhurried, like a promise that was not in any rush to be kept. The union had started exhaling around us, students gathering bags and pulling on jackets, the shelter-in-place energy dissolving back into the ordinary momentum of a Tuesday evening. Someone nearby was loudly debating whether the dining hall was still serving, which was exactly the kind of concern that belonged to a person whose afternoon had not fundamentally rearranged itself in the span of one storm. I was still holding Calder's hand. This was a fact I was aware of. I had not let go, and he had not withdrawn, and the contact had settled into something that was no longer charged with the electricity of the first moment, and was instead just warm and present, the way a thing feels when it has been decided without a formal decision being made. Sawyer was describing something about the graduate housing situation on the east side of campus, and Reed was listening with the focused patience of someone mentally filing information for later use. And I was in the specific, pleasant daze of a person who had cried inside without actually crying, and told the truth about hard things, and had somehow ended up warmer than they started. Then the union door opened, and I smelled him before I saw him. Cedar wood and synthetic fabric softener, and underneath both of those, something that my body recognized with a cold, immediate clarity that had nothing to do with warmth. The ghost of a scent that had meant safety once, and now meant something I did not have a clean word for. Daniel Ashworth walked into the Alfred Packer Grill looking exactly the way he always looked. Tall, composed, the kind of effortlessly put together that came from never having to be anxious about how he was perceived. He was with another graduate student I recognized from the environmental law corridor, deep in conversation, and he had not seen me yet. I let go of Calder's hand. The withdrawal was not dramatic. I just opened my fingers and moved my hand back to my side of the table, and the loss of contact was immediate and specific. A temperature drop that had nothing to do with the air. Calder registered it. I felt the shift in the atmosphere beside me, careful and attending. "Eli," he said quietly. "I'm fine," I said. Daniel turned. The moment he saw me, his face did the thing I had watched it do 100 times. The quick, practiced composure of a man who managed situations the way some people manage spreadsheets, efficiently and without visible feeling. He said something to the person beside him, and then he was walking over, because Daniel Ashworth had never once in his life decided to leave a situation alone when he could engage it. "Eli," he said, and his voice had that particular register it always used with me. Warm, contained, pitched slightly lower than his regular conversational tone. The voice that had taken me 6 weeks to understand was a tool rather than a feeling. "Daniel," I said. He looked at the table. He looked at Calder and Sawyer and Reed with the brief, assessing glance of a man cataloging variables. And I watched the exact moment he registered the three of them as alphas, and the scent dynamics of the table, and the specific geometry of me sitting among them without a pack scent of my own to explain the configuration. "I didn't know you were running with a new pack," he said, and his voice was still controlled, but there was something underneath it, thin and precise, that I recognized as the edge he used when something had surprised him and he was determining how to manage the surprise. "I didn't know I needed to report my social arrangements to you," I said. "That's not what I meant." "Then clarify what you meant, Daniel. I'm interested in the clarification." Sawyer had gone very still beside me, the practiced stillness of someone who was reading a situation carefully before deciding what it required of him. Reed had set both hands flat on the table, the motion so deliberate it was almost geometric. Calder said nothing, but the wood smoke of him shifted, going from warm to something older and more grounded, the scent equivalent of a person planting their feet. Daniel looked at me with the expression I knew meant he was deciding which version of the conversation to have. The reasonable one, or the one where he rewrote what was happening into a narrative that centered him correctly. "I've been meaning to reach out," he said. "There are things we didn't finish." "We finished," I said, "the day I put down your laptop and told you to leave. We finished thoroughly. You made a decision based on something you felt without asking me to explain. I asked you to explain, I said. You explained that the problem was my ability. I found that explanation insufficient. Eli, his voice dropped, and I hated that it still did the thing to the air between us. The intimate frequency that I had spent weeks trying to stop responding to. You're pregnant. The table went silent, not the comfortable silence of earlier, the kind that has a shape, that takes up space, that changes the atmospheric pressure of a room. I did not ask how he knew. My psychometry told me before I could form the question. The emotional residue of someone who had been tracking information about me from a distance, through mutual contacts, through the particular network of a campus where graduate programs overlapped and people talked. He had known for at least a week. That's not a conversation we're having here, I said. It's not a conversation we should have had at all without you telling me, he said, and the reasonable voice was fully engaged now, the one that made everything feel like my mismanagement rather than his. I had a right to know. You had a bond you didn't tell me about for 7 months, I said. I think we can agree that your relationship with the concept of rights requires some examination. Sawyer made a very small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh if the situation had been anything other than what it was. Daniel's composure tightened by a fraction. He looked at the three alphas again, and this time the look held longer, and when it landed on Reed, it stopped. Something moved across Daniel's face. Not surprise exactly, something more complicated than surprise. The expression of a person encountering a variable they had not anticipated being here. Reed was looking back at him, and Reed's expression was doing something I had not seen it do in the entire afternoon. It was doing nothing. Completely flat, completely controlled, the particular blankness that is not neutrality, but the performance of neutrality. And my psychometry caught the edge of it from across the table, without any physical contact required, because whatever was underneath Reed's expression right now was sharp enough to carry. My chest went cold. Daniel said, "Reed." Reed said, "Daniel." The word landed like a verdict. I looked at Reed. He was not looking at me. He was looking at Daniel with the flat, controlled expression of a man who had just watched something arrive that he had been anticipating and had not been able to prevent. And underneath the control, my psychometry was reading something I did not want to be reading. Knowledge. Not recent knowledge, not the surprised, assembling knowledge of a person encountering an unexpected connection. The settled, pre-existing knowledge of a person who had known a thing for a while and had been sitting with it. Reed knew Daniel Ashworth. I pulled my gloves off the table and stood up. "Eli," Calder said. "Don't," I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me, because what was happening inside my chest was not even at all. It was the specific surgical sensation of something opening that I had worked very hard to close. "Don't do the voice." "What voice?" Calder said. "The low, careful voice, the one that means you're trying to manage how hard something lands." I looked at Reed. "How do you know him?" Reed met my eyes. He did not look away, and he did not flinch, and he did not offer the practiced composure of a man managing a situation. He looked at me with an expression that I recognized, after an afternoon of learning his face, as the one he wore when he was about to say a true thing that was going to cost him. "He's my cousin," Reed said. The room continued existing around me. Students continued gathering bags. The overhead screens continued cycling the post-storm all clear notification. Somewhere nearby, someone was still discussing the dining hall. "Your cousin," I repeated. "Yes." "And you knew," I said. "When we sat down at this table, when we transferred into the section, when Sawyer jogged after me on the Union steps, you knew who I was in relation to him." Reed's jaw tightened by one fraction. "Yes." "How long?" 3 weeks, he said. 3 weeks. The exact length of time I had been avoiding buying the pregnancy test. The exact length of time they had been, as Sawyer had said on the steps, noticing. So when you said I was the kind of person who handles hard things without losing themselves, I said, and my voice was doing something complicated that I was fighting to keep straight. When you said I was catching up, when you sat at this table and listened to me tell you about Daniel like you were learning something new. Reed said, what I felt in that moment was real. What I said was true. What you said was also a performance by a person who had context I didn't have and chose not to share it. It wasn't a performance. It was an omission, I said, which is what Daniel does. He omits the parts that would change my decision, and then he tells me my reaction to finding out is the problem. The comparison landed. I watched it land on Reed's face. Something cracked there, briefly and precisely, and I felt it in my palms without touching anything. The specific pain of a person who has just had their behavior reflected back to them in a frame they cannot argue with. Calder stood up. Eli, let me explain what happened. When Reed told us about Daniel, when we understood who you were in relation to the situation, we had already been watching what Marcus was doing. We had already decided to do something about it. The connection to Daniel is not the reason we approached you. It is the reason you had information about me that I didn't consent to share, I said. Yes, Calder said. He did not try to soften it. That's true, and you deserve to know that before today. You think? I said. Daniel, who had been standing through this entire exchange with the expression of a man watching a situation he had caused spiral in a direction he had not modeled, said, Eli, I think we should talk privately about the pup. Something in me went very quiet, not calm. The specific quietness that happens right before a precise and targeted response. Daniel, I said, I want you to hear this clearly because I'm only going to say it once. The pup is mine. My decision, my future, my responsibility, and my joy if I choose to receive it as that. You have a bond in Seattle and a pattern of managing people through omission, and you have used your last moment of standing next to me like you have a claim. His jaw worked. You can't just decide that unilaterally. I can and I have, I said. Goodbye. I picked up my backpack. I pulled on my jacket. I looked at Calder and Sawyer and Reed, and the looking hurt in a way that I had not given myself permission to feel yet, but was going to feel later, alone, with significant intensity. Thank you for the chamomile, I said to Sawyer, because it was true, and because he had not lied, and I was not willing to make him collateral damage, even while everything else was on fire. Sawyer looked like he had swallowed something difficult. Eli, Calder said, and his voice broke from the careful low register into something raw, and I felt the wood smoke of him like a hand on my back, not touching, just present, and I wanted so badly to turn around. I did not turn around. I walked to the door and pushed through it, and the evening air of a post-storm Boulder hit me, cold and clean and smelling of wet earth, and the creek running high, and the flatirons emerging from their cloud cover into a sky that had the washed, specific clarity of something that had just been through something. My hands were shaking inside my gloves. My chest was a specific kind of hollow that I recognized from the last time I had trusted someone with a true thing and discovered the ground beneath it was not what I thought. The pup was still there, small and real, and mine. Catching up, Reed had said, and even now, even with the crack running through the afternoon, the phrase had not lost its weight. I kept walking. Behind me, through the union door I had let close, 3 scents lingered on the edge of my awareness. Pine and cedar and wood smoke. And the wood smoke one was the last to fade. It faded slowly, like it was not ready to. The path back to my dorm cut through the east side of the quad, past the creek that was running loud and fast from the storm runoff, past the big cottonwood that had lost 2 branches in the wind and left them across the path like something that had given up mid-sentence. I stepped over them without breaking stride because I was operating on the particular autopilot that kicks in when your brain needs to process something too large to hold consciously and your body just handles forward motion without being asked. My dorm was Sewell Hall, 12 minutes from the Union on a normal day. Tonight I was apparently walking faster than normal because I covered it in 9, which I know because I checked my phone at the Union door and checked it again when I badged into the building. The compulsive time checking of a person whose internal clock had stopped functioning correctly. The stairwell smelled like someone had been cooking ramen on the 3rd floor again. I took the stairs to the 4th floor, badged into the room, dropped my backpack on the floor beside my bed, sat down on the edge of the mattress, and did the thing I had been holding back since the Union. I let myself feel it. Not the pregnancy, though that was present, a quiet constant in the background of everything. Not Daniel, whose presence I had already processed into a clean, finished shape that lived in the past tense where it belonged. Reed. The specific quality of pain that comes not from betrayal by an enemy, but from the discovery that someone who felt like safety was holding information that should have been yours. The difference between a lie and an omission is sometimes just semantics, and sometimes it is the exact thing that determines whether you can trust your own instincts. I had felt Reed's honesty through my psychometry all afternoon. Clean, structural, the load-bearing wall. And I had not been wrong. His care was real. His words were true. Every single thing he said, he meant. And he had still known about Daniel for 3 weeks without saying so. I pressed my palms flat against the bedspread and breathed. The psychometry from the fabric was low and soft. Jasper's sensible background calm layered over my own accumulated mornings, dozens of them, getting up and getting dressed and going out to be a person in the world, despite the weight of being a pregnant, unmated Omega on a campus that had decided I was a convenient target. The emotional residue of my own resilience soaked into the thread count of a standard-issue dorm mattress cover. That almost made me laugh. Almost. My phone buzzed. I looked at it with the optimism of someone who knew what they were hoping for and was not ready to admit it. I heard, "Rowan from the architecture program was in the Union. Are you okay?" Define okay. You used that one already. It keeps being applicable. A pause, then, "I'm coming home. Don't internally combust before I get there." I put the phone down. The room was quiet in the particular way dorm rooms are quiet. Thin walls and muffled corridor sound, and the specific loneliness of a space designed for sleeping and studying that is currently required to hold something much larger. I looked at the ceiling, which was standard institutional white, and offered nothing. I thought about Calder's palm turned upward on the table. I thought about the recognition I had felt when I touched his hand, the depth of it, the roots of it. That had not been manufactured. My psychometry did not manufacture. It read what was present, nothing more and nothing less. What was present in Calder when my bare hand touched his was real and specific and had been building for longer than one afternoon, which meant the question was not whether what happened between us was real. The question was what I did with real things that arrived wrapped in complications. I had a pup coming. I had a semester to finish. I had a psychometry ability that was currently running at approximately twice its usual sensitivity and showing no signs of settling. I had $47 in my account until financial aid, which I had mentally upgraded to a personality trait at this point. What I did not have, and had not had in a long time, was people. Not Jasper people. Jasper was permanent and non-negotiable. But the other kind. The kind you build a life alongside. The kind who show up in storms and push coffee cups across tables and say true things in the flat, careful voice of people who are not performing care, but simply providing it. The kind who sit with their palm open and do not reach. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I stared at it. My psychometry did not work through phones, a limitation I had once considered a flaw and currently considered a mercy. I picked up. Eli, Calder's voice, low and careful, and with something in it I had not heard all afternoon. The raw register, the one that existed underneath the controlled attention. "I got your number from the class group me. That's a mild invasion of privacy, I said. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Are you apologizing for the number or for the other thing? A pause. Both. The number was expedient, and the other thing is something I should have done differently, and I need you to know that I understand why. I was quiet. Reed is downstairs, he said, outside your building. He walked here from the union, and he hasn't come inside because he doesn't know if you want him to. And he's standing in the wet because he doesn't know what else to do with himself. And I have never in 5 years seen Reed not know what to do with himself. Something moved in my chest, small and stubborn and against my better judgment. It's cold out, I said. It is very cold out, Calder agreed. The storm left everything about 40 degrees colder than this morning. That's his problem. It is entirely his problem, Calder said. I'm not asking you to fix it. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know that he came, and that what it took for Reed to walk to someone and stand outside their building in the cold is not a small thing. I closed my eyes. Here is the thing about psychometry that nobody tells you. It does not give you certainty. It gives you emotional truth, which is a different thing entirely. Emotional truth is messier. It does not resolve into clean conclusions. It shows you what someone feels without telling you whether feeling it is enough. Reed felt guilt. Genuine, architectural, load-bearing guilt. Not the managed guilt of a person calculating what they need to express to achieve a desired outcome. The real kind, that sits in the body and weighs something. That did not mean I was obligated to accept it, but it meant I owed the situation honesty, which was the same thing I had demanded of everyone else today. If I go downstairs, I said, I am not promising anything. Nobody is asking for promises, Calder said. I'm also not going to make it easy. I would be concerned if you did, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite the almost smile, but lived in the same neighborhood. I stood up. I put my jacket back on. I took the stairs back down, which my legs noted as an opinion about my decision-making, and I pushed through the building's ground floor door into the post-storm evening. Reed was standing on the path outside. He was not pacing. He was not performing remorse with hunched shoulders or downcast eyes. He was just standing, straight and still, the way he did everything, with his hands at his sides and the pine scent of him going cold in the night air. His hair was damp from the storm residue on the tree branches, which meant he had walked through the quad rather than the covered path. He looked at me when I came out. You walked through the quad, I said. The covered path is longer, he said. It's dry. I wasn't prioritizing dry, he said. I crossed my arms and looked at him and let the silence be what it was. He held it, the way he held everything, without flinching and without filling it unnecessarily. Then he said, I met you knowing who you were in relation to Daniel. That gave me context about your situation before you chose to share it with me. It was not fair to you, and I did not correct it when I should have. When should you have? I said. When you told us about him at the table, he said without hesitation. That was the moment. You were giving us your trust, and I was holding information that was relevant, and I told myself it would complicate something that was just beginning, and I kept it back. He paused. That was a choice I made for my own reasons, and it cost you something. It cost me the ability to decide for myself whether I wanted you at that table, I said. Yes, he said. The feeling I read from you was always real, I said. I know that. That's not what I'm holding against you. I know, he said. What I'm holding against you is that you let me sit there and tell you the story of a person who managed me through omission, and you said nothing about the omission you were currently managing me through. His jaw tightened. Yes. I watched him hold that. He did not try to contextualize it or redistribute the weight of it. He took it fully, the way someone takes something they know they owe. Why does it matter to you? I said, truthfully, not the pack instinct version, the real version. Reed was quiet for a moment. The creek was audible from here, running fast from the storm, and the cottonwoods along the bank were dripping steadily, and the sky above us was the clear, deep blue of a Colorado evening that had earned its color. "Because my cousin is not a good person," he said, "and I have spent a long time watching him move through the world, leaving damage behind him, and telling himself the damage was other people's mismanagement." He looked at me steadily. "And when I found out about you, I felt something I was not expecting, which was angry, on behalf of someone I had never met. And then we saw you on campus, and I felt something else I was not expecting." "What?" I said. "Like it mattered whether you were okay?" he said. "Not as an obligation, not because of Daniel, just because you are a specific person, and whether you are okay is something that matters to me in a way that is not connected to anything logical." My psychometry was not delivering a reading. We were not in contact, but his voice had the texture of an unguarded thing, and his voice was enough. "That's not a small admission for you," I said. "No," he said, "it is not." I uncrossed my arms. The path between us was 5 feet of wet concrete and post-storm cold, and the complicated air of two people deciding what they were going to do with an afternoon that had been broken open and was now waiting to see what filled the space. "I'm still deciding," I said, "about all of this, about what I want and what I'm willing to try, and what I can hold alongside everything else I am currently holding." "Okay," he said. "Don't okay me with that voice right now," I said. "Jasper okays me with that voice, and Calder okays me with that voice, and it is extremely effective, and I am immune to it." "You're not immune to it," Reed said, and his face did something I had not seen it do all afternoon. It broke, briefly and entirely, into a real expression. Not the almost smile Sawyer carried, something rarer, a crack of genuine warmth that moved across his face like the light through the flatirons after a storm, sudden and total and gone almost before you could name it. It wrecked me a little. I was not going to tell him that. "Come inside," I said instead. "It is 40 degrees and you walk through the wet quad, and Jasper is going to be home soon, and he is going to want to have opinions about today, and I would rather have that conversation once with everyone present than twice." Reed blinked. "Everyone?" "Text Calder and Sawyer," I said. "Tell them to bring food, not chips. Something with protein because I have a pup to feed, and my body has been running on chamomile and adrenaline since 11 this morning." Something settled in Reed's expression. Not relief exactly, something quieter and more durable. "Okay," he said. "Reed," I said. "Yes. If you okay me one more time tonight, I am going to read every object in your immediate vicinity and report back everything I find." He considered this for approximately 2 seconds. "That seems fair," he said, and pulled out his phone. I turned back toward the building door and held it open, and he came inside, and the warmth of the building closed around us both, and my psychometry caught just the edge of what was moving through him as he passed me. It was the same thing I had read in Calder's palm that afternoon. "There you are, smaller this time, more careful, but present." I let the door close. Upstairs, the dorm room was still quiet, and the ceiling was still institutional white, and the pup was still 6 weeks old and the size of nothing. But the room was about to have people in it, and I was, quietly and against considerable odds, okay with that. Reed texted on the stairwell. I could hear the small sound of it, the message sending, the brief pause, then the buzz of a response that made something in his posture shift by one fraction toward settled. He did not show me the exchange. I did not ask. There are intimacies that belong to people before they belong to you, and learning the difference between what you have a right to know and what you simply want to know is the entire project of being a person who has been hurt and is choosing, carefully and with full awareness of the risk, to try again. Jasper arrived first. He came through the door with his architecture portfolio under one arm and the expression of a person who had been speedwalking since the moment he left the architecture building, which his slightly damp hair and the specific energy of controlled urgency confirmed. He looked at me. He looked at Reed, standing near the window with his hands in his jacket pockets and the pine scent of him quietly filling the room. He looked back at me. "Okay," he said. "Jasper," I said. "I'm not saying anything," he said. "I'm simply observing." "Your eyebrows are saying something." "My eyebrows are neutral," he said for the second time today, with the same complete absence of credibility, and dropped his portfolio on his bed and sat down beside it and became the world's most attentive audience for whatever was about to happen next. Calder and Sawyer arrived 11 minutes later. Sawyer had a paper bag from the Thai place on Canyon Boulevard and the specific expression of a man who had been told there was a situation requiring food and had taken that assignment seriously. Calder was behind him, and he came through the door and found me immediately, the way he had been doing all afternoon, that direct green attention that did not perform itself, and something in me that had been pulled tight since the union exhaled by one quiet degree. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he said. We had not spoken since the union. The word carried everything that had happened since and did not try to resolve it, just acknowledged it, and that was the right thing, the only honest thing, and I noted it and let it settle. Sawyer set the food on the desk and started distributing containers with the efficient warmth of someone who feeds people as a primary love language. And Jasper accepted a container with the enthusiasm of a person who had skipped lunch, and the room filled with the smell of lemongrass and basil and something with peanuts that my pup apparently approved of, because the nausea that had been circling all day stepped back and let hunger through for the first time. I sat on my bed with my container and my plastic fork, and I looked at the 4 people in my dorm room. Reed, standing near the window, eating with the focused economy of a man who approached meals the same way he approached everything, efficiently and without ceremony. Sawyer, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the desk, somehow already in conversation with Jasper about the structural merits of brutalist architecture, which Jasper had opinions about that were going to take at least 20 minutes to fully express. Calder, sitting on the edge of the desk chair he had turned to face the room, not eating yet, watching me with the green eyes and the careful attention and the wood smoke warmth that had been finding me all day like it had my coordinates memorized. "Eat," I told him. "I will," he said. "You're staring." "I'm looking," he said. "There's a difference." "Enlighten me." "Staring doesn't care about what it sees," he said. "Looking does." I ate a bite of Pad CU and looked at the ceiling and decided I was not going to acknowledge how effectively that had landed. Jasper, without looking up from his food, said, "I like him." "Nobody asked you," I said. "My eyebrows asked," Jasper said. Reed made a sound that was, unmistakably, a suppressed laugh. I had never heard Reed suppress a laugh before, and the sound of it was so unexpected and so genuinely warm that Sawyer looked up from his food with an expression of pure delight, the way you look when something rare and good happens. The room settled into eating, and the particular easy rhythm of people who have been through something together and are on the other side of it, not resolved, not finished, but past the worst pressure of it. Jasper's lamp made the room amber. The window showed Boulder evening, the flatirons fully visible now against a sky that had gone deep blue and clear, the storm completely gone, the mountains standing there the way they always did, patient and enormous, and entirely unbothered by the human drama unfolding at their feet. When the food was done, Jasper gathered the containers with the diplomatic instinct of someone who understood that the room needed reconfiguring, said something about a late critique session he needed to review notes for, and took himself and his portfolio to the library with a look at me on the way out that said everything he was too tactful to say out loud. I loved him enormously. The door closed. The four of us sat in the quiet. It was not the charged, waiting quiet of earlier. It was softer than that. The kind of quiet that has been through something and come out the other side wearing different clothes. Calder set down his fork and looked at me directly. No sideways angle this time, fully frontal, the way he had only done a handful of times today, and each time it had cost me something I had not budgeted for. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it once, clearly, without any of the careful management I've been applying to it all afternoon." "Go ahead," I said. "We don't know what this is," he said. "That's still true, but I know what today was, and I know what it meant that you let us in. And I know that whatever you are carrying, the pup and the semester and the $47, you have been carrying it in a way that most people would not have managed without breaking. And I think you are extraordinary, and I think the pup is going to be extraordinary, and I think that whatever space you are willing to give us, we will fill it and not overflow it, and not ask for more than you have to give." The room was very still. "That's a significant promise," I said. "I know," he said. "You've known me for one afternoon." "I know," he said again, without any less certainty. My psychometry was quiet. I was not touching anything, not reaching, just sitting with my bare hands resting on my knees. And what came without any effort at all was the simple, ambient warmth of three people in a room who meant exactly what they were presenting. No omissions, no managed narrative, no performance of care disguising a calculation underneath. Just this, just here, just now. I looked at Sawyer. "You have something to say too. You have been holding it since the food arrived." Sawyer grinned, the full version, unreserved and warm. "I was going to say that I already looked up the campus Omega Resources office, and they have a pregnancy accommodation program that most people don't know about. Financial support, housing priority for the following year, academic flexibility." I wrote down the contact. He held up his phone. "No pressure, just information." I stared at him. "You looked that up," I said. "When?" "On the walk over," he said. "I multitask. You brought food and did resource research on a 10-minute walk." "The food was the priority," he said earnestly. "The research was secondary." Reed said from the window, without inflection, "I already emailed the contact." I turned to look at him. "I emailed the coordinator," he said. "I explained the situation broadly and asked for an appointment on your behalf. You don't have to keep it, but it's there." "Reed," I said, "you can tell me to stay in my lane," he said. "I'm not going to tell you to stay in your lane," I said. "I'm going to tell you that was presumptuous and also the most useful thing anyone has done for me since September." Something moved in his face again, the rare warmth, slower this time, and less surprised by itself. "September," he said. "I'm sorry it took us until October." "You're here now," I said, and I meant it as a practical statement, and it came out as something larger than that, the way true things sometimes exceed their container. "You are here now, in this room, in this evening, after this day that began in a library bathroom and crossed a storm and broke open and held and arrived here, in the amber lamplight of a dorm room that smells like lemongrass and cedar and pine and wood smoke, and the specific warmth of people who have decided, without a formal vote, that they are going to show up." Calder moved from the desk chair to the bed, not rushing, the same deliberate asking quality he had brought to every movement today. He sat beside me, close enough that the wood smoke of him was fully present, and the warmth of his arm was almost touching mine. He turned his palm upward, the same offer as before, the same open hand, no reaching, just the door held open. I did not take off my glove this time. I did not need to. I placed my hand in his, glove and all, and the contact was warm and solid, and the psychometry did not read the room with urgent clarity or sharp revelation. It just said, yes. Quiet and certain, and underneath it, the sound of something that had been waiting a very long time to stop holding its breath. I have conditions, I said, to the room at large, because I was Eli Carter, and I had never once in my life arrived at a significant moment without a framework. Obviously, Sawyer said, and he was already smiling, the pup comes first. Always. Every decision we ever make in any configuration, the pup is the first consideration. Yes, Calder said without hesitation. I am not a project. I am not a situation. I am not the Omega with a sad backstory who needed saving. I am a person who had a hard semester and made a choice to let people in, and that choice belongs to me. Understood, Reed said. I will read all of you, regularly and without warning. It is non-negotiable and occasionally invasive, and you should assume that your emotional truth is not private around me. That seems efficient, Sawyer said. And if anyone at any point pulls an omission on me, I said, and let the word land where it needed to land, I will know before they finish the sentence, and the conversation that follows will not be comfortable. Reed met my eyes across the room. Fair, he said. Deeply fair, Calder agreed. I looked at the three of them, the pine and cedar and wood smoke of them, woven together in the warm air of a room that had started the day empty and had filled itself with something I did not have a word for yet, but that my psychometry had been trying to show me since a hallway in the environmental design building at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday. I thought about the pup. 6 weeks, the size of nothing, coming into a world I had been terrified to navigate alone. I thought about 2 pink lines and $47 and a Tuesday that had no right to be this significant and had decided to be anyway. I thought about Reed's open accounting on a wet path, Sawyer jogging across the Union, Calder's palm turned upward twice in one afternoon. Okay, I said, and that okay was not the deflecting kind, and not the closing kind, and not the I am fine when I am not kind. It was the kind that means yes, the kind that means I see you, and I am choosing this, and I am going to be terrified and do it anyway, because that is what courage actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to move towards something true, despite it. Calder's fingers closed gently around mine. Sawyer leaned his head back against the wall and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a person who had wanted something for a while and was quietly, privately relieved to have it. Reed turned from the window and sat down on Jasper's bed with the settled quality of someone who had been standing outside in the cold and had come in and was, finally, warm. Outside, the Flatiron stood in the clear night sky of a Boulder October, patient and enormous and completely indifferent to everything, which was what made them so comforting. Inside, a pup the size of nothing was growing in the warmth. Inside, 3 alpha cents had stopped being 3 separate things and had started becoming something woven, something that settled over the room like a blanket that had always been exactly the right size. Inside, I was still Eli Carter, 20 years old, environmental policy junior, psychometrist, $47 in my account, the best note-taker in Professor Adkins' seminar, and the sassiest unmated Omega on the University of Colorado Boulder campus. I was also, as of this Tuesday, no longer alone. The Flatirons caught the moonlight, the pup caught up, and somewhere underneath the wood smoke and the pine and the cedar, underneath the chamomile warmth and the lamp amber, and the sound of a creek still running fast from the storm, something that had been locked for a very long time turned open, and stayed that way.